Las Vegas, 1962. The neon lights shimmered like artificial stars above the desert, turning night into something that defied nature itself. Inside the grand showrooms, crystal chandeliers refracted light into 1,000 dancing fragments across polished marble floors. The air was thick with competing scents. Expensive cologne mixing with cigarette smoke, the metallic tang of money changing hands, the sweet decay of cocktails left too long on tables. And at the center of it all stood Dean Martin. To the world watching from velvet seats and television screens, he was smooth charm incarnate. His tuxedo hung perfectly on his frame, tailored in Rome, pressed to razor precision. A glass of bourbon rested lightly in his hand, never quite emptying, never quite full. His voice melted through velvet curtains as audiences leaned forward, mesmerized by something they couldn't quite name. He joked between verses. He made it look effortless. He appeared untouchable, existing in a space between mortal concern and divine indifference. But Las Vegas in the early 1960s was not just glamour and sequins. It was territory, and territory belonged to men who did not sing for applause. They ruled through fear, controlled through violence, and measured worth in submission. One of those men was Vincent Torino. Vincent controlled the docks where cargo arrived under moonlight. He controlled the unions that decided who worked and who starved. He controlled the nightclubs where money flowed like champagne, and anything that moved through the city after midnight answered him or paid the price. Politicians shook his hand at fundraisers and avoided asking questions. Cops looked the other way when his name came up in reports. Other mobsters, men with their own territories and their own reputations, avoided crossing him the way sailors avoid storms. He was 53 years old, built like a bull, with iron gray hair slicked back from a face that had forgotten how to smile without calculating. His hands were scarred from early years spent enforcing his will personally before he'd risen high enough to delegate violence. He wore Italian suits that cost more than most people earned a year, and he wore them the way other men wore armor. And like many powerful men who'd never been told no, Vincent Torino believed entertainers were ornaments, useful for attracting crowds, replaceable when they lost their shine, decorative pieces that existed to make powerful men look cultured. That illusion was about to shatter in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. It would happen one night in a private penthouse suite high above the Strip, where the city's glow seemed distant and the rules of ordinary society no longer applied. The poker table. The suite belonged to Vincent, though ownership was registered under 3 shell companies. Heavy burgundy drapes blocked the windows. Thick cigar smoke curled upward toward a single chandelier, smaller than the ones downstairs, more intimate, casting shadows that moved with the smoke. A round table dominated the room. Green felt worn smooth by countless hands, countless games, countless fortunes won and lost. Stacks of cash piled in the center. Not chips, actual money. Hundreds, thousands. The kind of stakes that separated serious players from tourists. Only trusted men were allowed inside. Vincent's inner circle. Carlo, his enforcer, a man whose bulk seemed to absorb light. Tommy, the ledger, who kept Vincent's books and knew where every dollar came from and went. Anthony, his nephew, being groomed for leadership, watching everything with hungry eyes. And Dean Martin. He'd been invited not as a performer, not as entertainment for the powerful, but as a player, an equal, or so they told him. Vincent liked having celebrities in his games. It made him feel like he'd transcended mere crime and entered some rarefied space where art and power mingled. The game had been running for 3 hours. Scotch had been poured and repoured. Cigars had been lit and abandoned. Money had moved around the table like tides, following luck's unpredictable currents. And for the last hour, Vincent had been winning, not small pots. Everything. He was reading the table perfectly, calling bluffs, folding at exactly the right moments, accumulating chips and cash until the pile in front of him dwarfed everyone else's. The scotch in his glass had been refilled 5 times. His face had taken on that dangerous glow of a man who believed himself invincible, who felt luck running through his veins like blood, who had forgotten, if he ever knew, that luck always runs out. The banter around the table started casually enough. Jokes about the showgirls downstairs. Commentary on recent sports events. Stories about politicians who'd been bought. Cops who'd looked the other way. Deals that had gone right and deals that had gone wrong for people stupid enough to cross Vincent. Then the banter sharpened. Vincent started directing comments at Dean. Friendly at first. "How's the singing business treating you, Dean?" Then with an edge. "Must be nice. Just standing on a stage while other people do the real work." Dean smiled, took a sip of bourbon, said nothing. Vincent pressed further. "You know, Dean, guys like you're lucky guys like me let you work in this town. Without us, what would you be? Another nobody crooning in some dive bar in Ohio, hoping drunk college kids throw you a quarter." The other men laughed, not because it was funny, because Vincent was saying it. Dean's smile never changed. "Lucky indeed, Vincent." The insult, the game continued. Cards were dealt. Money was pushed forward. Someone folded. Someone raised. The rhythm of poker, ancient and hypnotic, played out while the tension in the room slowly tightened like a wire. Vincent was drunk now, not sloppy drunk. Vincent never lost control that way, but drunk enough that the careful filter most people maintain between thought and speech had eroded. Drunk enough to believe his own invincibility extended beyond cards and money into areas where it decidedly did not. He just won another large hand. The money was pushed toward him. He was laughing, feeling expansive, feeling like a king surrounded by subjects. That's when he turned to Dean and spoke. The words that came out of his mouth were crude, vulgar, a joke about Dean's mother, mocking her immigrant background, her working-class origins, suggesting with graphic imagery that she'd had to do degrading things to survive, implying that without Vincent's connections, without the mob's permission, Dean would still be nobody, that his mother had raised nothing more than a trained monkey who happened to carry a tune. The room went silent, not the natural silence of a pause in conversation. The suffocating silence of a boundary crossed, of words spoken that couldn't be unspoken, of a line drawn that everyone recognized. Carlo's hand froze halfway to his mouth. Cigar forgotten. Tommy's eyes went wide. Anthony stopped breathing, sensing danger without understanding its source. The dealer's fingers, trained to keep moving no matter what, stopped mid-shuffle. They all expected the same thing. Dean Martin would explode. He was Italian, after all. Not Sicilian like Vincent, but Italian enough. Everyone knew what happened when you insulted a man's mother. Even in the world of entertainment, even in the softer sphere where Dean existed, there were lines. This was the most sacred one. Vincent would have to apologize immediately or defend himself. Either way, violence was coming. The room was too small, too private. When men like this fought, there was no walking away. But Dean didn't explode. He didn't stand up. His voice didn't rise. His hand didn't go to his jacket, where a weapon might be hidden. He didn't even break eye contact with his cards. Instead, he leaned back slowly in his chair. The leather creaked quietly. He set his cards down, face down, preserving the game's integrity even in this moment. And he smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not the charming Dean Martin smile that audiences paid to see. Not the conspiratorial grin he'd share with Frank and Sammy backstage. This was different. Patient, calm, almost pitying. The smile of a man who knew something the room didn't. The smile of a man who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Because what Vincent didn't know, what no one in that room knew except Dean himself, was that this wasn't about poker. It wasn't about a drunken insult. It wasn't even about Vincent's crude joke. This was about a promise made 3 years earlier. A promise made at a funeral on a gray morning when rain mixed with tears and grief hardened into something colder, more enduring. 3 years earlier, the trigger. 3 years before that poker game, before Vincent's winning streak, before the insult that would change everything, Dean Martin had a nephew named Michael. Michael Crocetti, 25 years old. Dark hair, intelligent eyes, the same Italian features as his uncle but sharper somehow, more intense. Where Dean had learned to charm and smooth his way through the world. Michael had learned to question, to dig, to never accept a surface explanation. He was an investigative journalist, working for a small but respected paper based out of Los Angeles. Not prestigious like the Times or the Herald, but honest. The kind of paper that actually published stories about corruption instead of killing them to protect advertisers and powerful friends. Michael had been working on something dangerous for 6 months. He'd started with a tip from a former dancer who'd escaped what she described as a circuit, a network that moved young girls, most of them teenagers, some younger, through private channels that bypassed any legitimate oversight. They arrived in shipping containers labeled as commercial goods. They were kept in basements of legitimate businesses. They were moved through tunnels that connected casinos to private warehouses. They were photographed, cataloged, and sold to men rich enough to believe their wealth placed them above law, above morality, above basic human decency. The network was sophisticated, protected, layered behind shell companies and corrupt officials and enforcers who made problems disappear before they could become public. Michael had names, dates, locations, photographs taken with a hidden camera, financial records copied from offices after hours, testimonies from 3 women who'd escaped and were willing to risk everything to speak truth. And the deeper Michael dug, the more one name kept appearing in the margins of documents, whispered in testimony, appearing in grainy surveillance photos taken outside warehouses at 3 a.m. Vincent Torino. Not directly. Vincent was too smart for that. But his organization provided security. His docks handled certain shipments that customs never inspected. His contacts ensured police investigations died quickly and quietly. Michael knew he was getting close. He told Dean as much during a phone call on a Tuesday evening. Dean was in Vegas, between shows. Michael was in Los Angeles, staying in a cheap motel because he'd moved out his apartment. Too easy to find, too predictable. "Uncle Dean," Michael said, his voice carrying an edge of excitement and fear mixed together. "I think I'm almost there. Another week, maybe 2. I'll have enough to bring down the whole operation." "Be careful, kid," Dean had replied, that same smooth voice, but underneath it something harder. "These aren't people who play by rules." "I know," Michael said, "but someone has to do something. These girls, Uncle Dean, some of them are 14, 13. Someone has to speak for them." That was the last conversation they had. 5 days later, Michael vanished. He'd been staying at the Stardust Motel, room 14, paid in cash, registered under a fake name. His car was found in the parking lot. Keys in the ignition, engine cold. His room was undisturbed. No signs of struggle, just absence. Dean arrived in Los Angeles within hours. He hired private investigators. He called in every favor he had. He spoke with police who took notes and said all the right things while their eyes said they already knew how this would end. 3 days after Michael disappeared, 2 hikers found his body in a scrapyard 30 miles outside the city. He'd been beaten so severely his own mother almost couldn't identify him. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma. The official story was robbery gone wrong. His wallet was missing, his watch gone, the terrible randomness of urban violence. But Michael's camera was found in a dumpster 10 miles away. The film was missing, but the camera itself had been wiped clean. Not the rushed cleaning of a panic thief, but the methodical erasure of evidence by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. And tucked inside Michael's shoe, missed in the initial search because the shoe itself was covered in blood, was a small piece of paper, a phone number, a Las Vegas prefix. When Dean called it later, a payphone rang in the service hallway behind Vincent Torino's private office at the Flamingo, at Michael's funeral. Held on a gray morning when October rain fell like tears, Dean Martin stood still among the black umbrellas and black suits and black veils. His face was composed, not a single tear visible. His mother sobbed beside him. His sister, Michael's mother, was nearly catatonic with grief. Other family members wailed or prayed or cursed God. Dean stood silent. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. Grief was there, it would never leave, but it was being transformed into something else. Something colder, more focused, more patient. That night, alone in his hotel room, Dean made a decision. He would not react with rage. Rage was what they expected. Rage was what they could handle, could redirect, could use to justify eliminating another problem. He would respond with patience. He would wait, watch, learn, build. And when the moment was perfect, when every piece was in place, he would act, not with violence. Violence was their language, and they spoke it fluently, with truth, with evidence, with the slow, inexorable machinery of justice that ground slowly, but ground exceeding fine. It would take years. It would require discipline most men didn't possess. It would mean smiling at people he wanted to destroy, shaking hands he wanted to break, performing for audiences that included his nephew's killers. But Dean was willing to wait, because some promises aren't about speed. They're about certainty, the long game. For 3 years, Dean Martin played his role with perfect precision. He performed at the Sands, at the Copa Room, at every major venue in Las Vegas where men in expensive suits sat at front tables and believed they owned the world. He joked, he sang, he charmed, he toasted with champagne and laughed at crude jokes and acted exactly like the smooth entertainer everyone expected him to be. And quietly, so quietly that not even Frank or Sammy knew what he was doing, he built a case. It started small. A photographer named Eddie, who'd worked security at one of Vincent's clubs, approached Dean after a show. Eddie had a drinking problem, a gambling debt, and a conscience that occasionally troubled him between bottles. He'd been documenting Vincent's operations for his own protection. Insurance, he called it. Duplicate rolls of film showing things that should never see light. Dean bought the film, all of it, and hired Eddie full-time as his personal photographer at triple his previous salary. Eddie stopped drinking, started documenting everything Vincent did, everywhere Vincent went, everyone Vincent met. The photographs accumulated, meetings in back rooms, cash exchanges in parking garages, at 3 a.m. handshakes with cops who were supposed to be investigating organized crime, Vincent entering warehouses that were officially closed, Vincent leaving buildings where screams had been reported but never investigated. Then came Sarah, a financial clerk who worked in the accounting department of one of Vincent's legitimate businesses, a restaurant supply company that somehow generated 10 times the revenue of similar businesses without appearing to supply many restaurants. Sarah was meticulous, careful, terrified, but her younger sister had almost been recruited into modeling work that Sarah recognized as something far darker. Sarah began making copies, ledgers, transfer records, offshore account numbers, shell company registrations, a paper trail that connected Vincent's legitimate businesses to his illegitimate ones, that showed exactly how money moved from trafficking to restaurants to offshore banks to real estate investments. She passed everything to Dean through a friend of a friend, never meeting him directly, never put herself in a position where Vincent could trace the leak. The financial documents joined the photographs. But Dean needed more. He needed witnesses. People close to Vincent who could testify about decisions made, orders given, the chain of command that led from street-level operations to Vincent's private office. That's when something unexpected happened. 2 of Vincent's own security men reached out through intermediaries, Marcus and Ray, both former military. Both had taken jobs with Vincent because the pay was good, and they told themselves they were just providing security for a businessman whose operations happened to exist in gray legal areas. Both had gradually realized they were protecting a monster. The breaking point came when Vincent ordered them to dispose of evidence related to a trafficking operation. Not paperwork, not drugs, not weapons. A 16-year-old girl who'd become problematic, who'd threatened to talk, who'd shown too much spirit and not enough fear. Vincent's order had been clear. Make her disappear permanently. Marcus and Ray had looked at each other. Some lines couldn't be uncrossed. Some orders couldn't be followed without losing whatever remained of your soul. They'd taken the girl to a women's shelter 3 states away instead, given her cash, helped her disappear in the right direction, towards safety rather than a shallow grave. Then they'd started talking to Dean Martin's people. They provided something the photographs and financial records couldn't. Context, conversations they'd overheard, meetings they'd attended, direct testimony about orders Vincent had given, violence he'd authorized, operations he'd overseen personally. They wore wires, recorded conversations, documented 3 years of Vincent's criminal empire in excruciating detail. And through all of it, every meeting with informants, every examination of evidence, every hour spent building his case, Dean Martin continued performing, continued being the charming, effortless Dean that audiences loved. continued smiling at Vincent at poker games and industry events, and chant encounters in casino restaurants. Vincent never suspected. Why would he? Dean was an entertainer, a singer, talented, certainly, but fundamentally harmless, not a threat, not someone who understood how the real world worked. That misunderstanding would be Vincent's final mistake. The evidence accumulated. Dean stored it carefully. Copies in 3 separate locations, including a safety deposit box in a bank Vincent didn't control and a trusted attorney's office in San Francisco. Instructions were left. If anything happened to Dean, everything went to federal authorities immediately. Dean didn't rush, didn't make a move too soon, waited until every piece was perfect, every witness prepared, every document authenticated. He waited until Vincent himself provided the perfect opportunity. Until that poker game, that insult, that moment when Vincent's ego and alcohol combined to make him reveal his true contempt for Dean, for entertainers, for anyone he considered beneath him. The moment when Vincent would learn that beneath the smooth exterior and the charming smile, Dean Martin was as patient and remorseless as justice itself. The reveal, in the suffocating silence after Vincent's insult, while the room held its breath waiting for violence, Dean Martin reached slowly into his inside jacket pocket. The movement was deliberate, calm. Every man at the table tensed, hands moving toward their own jackets, their own protection. But Dean didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a small recording device, modern for 1962, expensive, sophisticated. The red light was blinking, recording. He set it gently on the green felt in the center of the table, right next to the stacks of money. Every word, Dean said quietly. His voice was still smooth, but something had changed in it, something harder underneath. Every word you've said tonight, Vincent, every crude joke, every threat, every admission about your operations, all recorded. Vincent stared at the device. His face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, then the beginning of rage. But before he could speak, Dean reached into his jacket again. This time he pulled out a thick manila envelope. He opened it slowly, methodically, the way a prosecutor might present evidence to a jury. And he began spreading photographs across the felt, covering cards and chips and money with images that told a story Vincent thought had been buried forever. The first photograph, a nighttime shot of the docks. Vincent's docks. A shipping container being opened by 3 men. A figure in the shadows. Vincent himself, identifiable by his build, his posture, the distinctive ring he always wore, pointing and giving orders. The second photograph, the interior of a warehouse. Crates marked as machine parts. One crate open, showing something else entirely. Young women's faces, terrified, illuminated by Eddie's hidden camera flash. The third photograph, Vincent sitting in a restaurant booth with 2 cops who were supposed to be investigating human trafficking. Money on the table between them. All 3 men laughing. Dean kept laying them down, each one more damning than the last. Vincent meeting with known traffickers. Vincent entering buildings where victims had been held. Vincent at private gatherings where girls who should have been in high school were being paraded for wealthy buyers. 3 years, Vincent, Dean said, his voice never rising, never losing that terrible calm. 3 years I've been documenting everything you do, everyone you meet, every operation you run. He laid down more photographs. Financial documents now. Bank statements showing impossible amounts moving through legitimate businesses. Offshore account records. Shell company papers with Vincent's signature buried in the fine print. Your restaurants that don't actually feed many people. Your import business that imports things beyond furniture and electronics. Your real estate holdings that somehow generate cash revenue in amounts that would make legitimate property management impossible. Vincent's face had gone from red to pale. The drunk swagger was evaporating like alcohol in desert heat. His eyes were moving from photograph to photograph, document to document, watching his entire empire spread out on a poker table like cards in a losing hand. But evidence isn't enough, is it? Dean continued. He nodded toward Marcus and Ray, Vincent's own security men, standing near the door. That's why I have witnesses. People you trusted. People who watched you for years. People who are willing to testify about everything they've seen, everything they've heard, every order you've given. Ray pulled out his own recording device. Hit play. Vincent's voice filled the room, ordering violence, discussing operations, using language that removed any possibility of claiming ignorance or indirect involvement. Carlo, Vincent's enforcer, moved as if to intervene, but Marcus's hand went to his jacket, not threatening, just ready. Carlo stopped. Dean laid down one final photograph. This one was different from the others. Older, slightly grainy. It showed Vincent in a dimly lit office, his office at Flamingo, sitting at his desk. On the desk in front of him was a photograph. Even in the poor lighting, you could see what it showed. A young man with dark hair and an intelligent face. Michael Crocetti. And Vincent was pointing at it, giving instructions to two men whose faces were partially visible. One of them was Carlo. The photograph had been taken 3 days before Michael disappeared. Dean's finger touched this final image, rested there. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer smooth. The pain came through, raw and unfiltered. My nephew, 25 years old, investigating trafficking networks. He got too close to your operations, so you had him killed. Made it look random. A robbery. Wrong place, wrong time. Vincent opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. But it wasn't random, Dean continued. You ordered it. You gave the signal. And my nephew died scared and in pain because he wanted to protect girls you were selling like property. The room was absolutely silent. Even breathing seemed too loud. Vincent's empire, built on fear, maintained through violence, protected by corruption, was collapsing, not with explosions or gunfire, with photographs, documents, recordings, truth. Dean reached into his jacket one final time, pulled out a single sheet of paper, handwritten. He placed it in front of Vincent. This is an apology, Dean said, addressed to my mother. You're going to read it aloud. You're going to sign it. And before sunrise, you're going to leave Las Vegas. Permanently. The terms. Vincent stared at the handwritten apology like it was written in a language he didn't understand. His hands trembled slightly. Not from fear alone. From rage. From humiliation. From the fundamental disorientation of having his entire worldview inverted in the space of 15 minutes. He was Vincent Torino, capo in the organization, connected to the biggest names in organized crime from Las Vegas to Chicago to New York. Men crossed the street to avoid displeasing him. Cops looked away when he passed. Politicians took his calls at midnight. And now a singer, an entertainer, someone he considered barely more significant than a showgirl or piano player, was giving him orders, telling him what to do, demanding he apologize and run. You're out of your mind, Vincent said finally. His voice was hoarse, damaged by cigar smoke and scotch. You have no idea what you're doing. No idea who you're threatening. I know exactly who I'm threatening, Dean replied. I've known for 3 years. That's why I was careful. That's why every piece of this evidence has been copied. Multiple locations. Multiple people holding it. If anything happens to me, it all goes to federal authorities automatically. Grand jury investigation within 48 hours. He leaned forward slightly. His eyes never left Vincent's. You have 2 choices, Vincent. Sign the apology, leave Vegas, and spend whatever time you have left trying to stay ahead of what's coming for you. Or refuse, and I make one phone call right now. The story hits newspapers tomorrow. Every photograph, every document. Federal task force gets full briefings by Monday morning. You're bluffing, Vincent said, but his voice lacked conviction. Dean smiled, that same patient smile. You've been playing poker all night, Vincent. Do I look like I'm bluffing? Vincent looked around the table, at Carlo, his enforcer, who was staring at the photographs with an expression of dawning horror, at Tommy the ledger, who was calculating odds and outcomes and coming to the conclusion that Dean Martin held all the cards, at Anthony, his nephew, who was looking at him with something new in his eyes, doubt, at Marcus and Ray, his own security men, standing ready not to defend him but to ensure he didn't try anything violent, At the recording device, its red light still blinking, documenting everything. Vincent's rage was real. His desire to flip the table, to attack Dean, to reestablish dominance through violence, was almost overwhelming. His entire life had been built on the principle that force overcame resistance, that fear controlled people, that anyone could be broken or bought. But Dean had outplayed him, not with force, with patience, with evidence, with the one thing Vincent had never truly respected: careful, methodical planning. "My people won't let you do this," Vincent tried. "They'll come for you." "Will they?" Dean asked. "Your people in Chicago who are always worried about bad publicity? Who want to run profitable operations without federal attention? What do you think they'll do when they find out you've been so sloppy that an entertainer built a case against you over 3 years? When they realize federal investigation is coming regardless, and the only question is how much damage you'll do to the organization on your way down?" Dean let that sink in. "You become a liability, Vincent. Bad for business. And your people don't tolerate liabilities." The truth of it showed on Vincent's face. He knew the organization's rules as well as anyone, probably better. When you became more trouble than you were worth, when you threatened to bring federal heat, when you made mistakes that couldn't be fixed, the organization cut its losses. Vincent's hands were shaking now, not just with rage anymore, with fear, real fear, perhaps the first genuine fear he'd felt in decades. He looked down at the handwritten apology, Dean's mother's name at the top, an admission of disrespect, an acknowledgement that his crude joke had been wrong, inappropriate, beneath the dignity any mother deserved. Signing it meant admitting weakness, meant being humiliated, meant everyone in this room would know Vincent Torino had been beaten by a singer with a microphone and a patient heart. Not signing it meant federal investigation, organizational abandonment, and probably a shallow grave in the desert before the feds could even file charges. Louder, Dean had said in response to Vincent's first mumbled apology, making him repeat it so everyone could hear. That's when Vincent truly understood. This wasn't just about justice for Michael. This wasn't just about stopping trafficking operations. This was about something more fundamental. Dean Martin was teaching him that dignity mattered, that some things couldn't be bought or stolen or controlled through fear, that trying to humiliate another human being carried consequences, even when you thought you were untouchable. Vincent's jaw clenched. His face was tight with fury. But he raised his voice and repeated the apology, loud enough for every person in that room to hear clearly. Then he signed the paper. His signature, normally bold and confident, looked shaky, diminished. Dean folded the apology carefully and put it in his pocket. "Now get out," he said quietly. "You have until sunrise. After that, if anyone sees you in Las Vegas, everything I have goes public immediately." Vincent stood slowly. His legs seemed unsteady. He looked around the room one final time, at his crew, his territory, his empire. Then he walked to the door. Marcus and Ray followed, not as a protection, but as his escort, making sure he actually left. The door closed behind them. In the sudden silence, Carlo looked at Dean with something like wonder. "He'll come back for you. You know that, right? He'll send someone. He'll..." "No," Tommy the Ledger interrupted, his accountant's mind already calculating the aftermath. "He won't. Dean's right. Vincent just became poison. Chicago will cut him loose. Everyone will. He's done." Dean stood, straightened his jacket, picked up his bourbon glass, still half full, never empty, and took a slow sip. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice returning to that familiar smooth tone, "I believe our game is finished for the evening." He walked out, leaving them sitting at a table covered with evidence of an empire's collapse. By sunrise, Vincent Torino was in a private car heading east toward the California border, escorted by 2 organization men whose instructions were simple: make sure he keeps going. Las Vegas continued glowing as if nothing had happened. The shows went on. The casinos stayed open. The neon lights kept promising dreams that rarely came true. But something fundamental had shifted in the balance of power. Justice delayed. 6 months passed. Vincent, now living under a false name in Buenos Aires, had convinced himself the nightmare was over. Dean's evidence was frightening, certainly, But without Vincent's presence, without anyone actively pursuing charges, the threat had faded to manageable levels. He'd taken a decent amount of money with him. Not everything. The organization had seized most of his assets, but enough to live comfortably in exile. He'd rented a nice apartment overlooking a tree-lined street. He ate well, drank well, even found local contacts who could arrange for certain services he'd grown accustomed to in Vegas. Life wasn't what it had been, but it was tolerable, survivable. He told himself he'd been smart to take Dean's deal, smart to leave quietly. In a year or two, when things cooled down, when people forgot, maybe he can negotiate a return, maybe not to Vegas, but somewhere in the organization, a quiet role, something to rebuild from. Hope is the cruelest thing to maintain when you know it's false, but Vincent maintained it anyway, until 4:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. He was sleeping, dreaming about the Flamingo's casino floor, when sirens shattered the pre-dawn quiet. Not a single siren. Many. Police. Military. The sound of vehicles screeching to stops, doors slamming, boots pounding upstairs. Vincent lurched awake, his heart hammering. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Buenos Aires felt dreamlike, Vegas felt real. Then reality crashed in as someone started pounding on his door. Abre la puerta. Policia. Vincent scrambled for his pants, his gun, any weapon. But before he could reach anything, the door exploded inward, with splintering, lock mechanism torn from the frame. Argentine authorities flooded in. Federal police, Interpol agents, men in suits who move with the precision of long experience, who'd done this hundreds of times, who'd been preparing for this specific raid for months. They threw Vincent face first onto the floor, cuffed him, read charges in Spanish and English both, making sure he understood every word. Trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy, racketeering, international crime spanning multiple jurisdictions, murder conspiracy. The last one made Vincent's blood freeze. Murder conspiracy. They had Michael's case. They had evidence about the nephew Dean had loved. They had everything. As they hauled him to his feet, Vincent saw the operation scope through his apartment windows. The entire building surrounded. Police blocking every exit. Media already gathering. Cameras ready to document his perp walk. This wasn't accidental timing. This wasn't Buenos Aires authorities stumbling onto a fugitive. This was coordinated, professional, the result of months of preparation, of evidence carefully provided through appropriate channels, of deals made between U.S. federal authorities and their Argentine counterparts. Dean Martin had kept his promise. Vincent spent the next several months in Argentine detention while extradition was processed. His lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to block his return to the United States. But the evidence was overwhelming. The crimes too serious. The political will too strong. Eventually, he was put on a plane back to America. The trial took 2 years. Federal prosecutors built their case methodically, using every piece of evidence Dean had gathered. The photographs, the financial records, the testimony from Marcus and Ray and others who'd finally found the courage to speak. Vincent's lawyers tried every defense. Entrapment, illegal surveillance, unreliable witnesses, false evidence. Nothing worked. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on every count. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd seen every kind of crime and every kind of criminal, showed no mercy. 40 years, federal prison, no possibility of parole for 30. Vincent was 56 when he entered prison. Even with perfect behavior, he'd be 86 before walking free again. The organization he'd served abandoned him completely. No visits, no commissary money, no attempts to arrange his release or reduce his sentence. He'd become a liability, an embarrassment, a cautionary tale about what happened when you got caught. In prison, Vincent aged rapidly. The bulk that had made him intimidating softened into fat. The sharp mind that had navigated criminal enterprises dulled. The fear he'd inspired evaporated. He became just another inmate, ignored, forgotten. He died at 68 from a heart attack in the prison medical wing. No family at his bedside. No mourners at his funeral. The organization that buried him in a county cemetery was a simple stone marking his name and dates. Nothing more. No one from Las Vegas attended. The world moved on without noticing his absence. The legacy: 3 weeks after Vincent's arrest, federal authorities seized his assets, bank accounts, property, investments, everything he'd accumulated through decades of crime. Officially, the money went to the government, restitution to victims, funding for law enforcement operations, the usual bureaucratic distribution. But some of it, a significant amount, was quietly redirected through channels that existed in the gray spaces between legal requirements and moral necessity. A journalism foundation was established, modest at first. It provided scholarships to young reporters interested in investigative work, particularly those willing to examine organized crime, political corruption, and trafficking networks. The foundation's first recipient was a young woman from Detroit who wanted to investigate labor trafficking in Midwest factories. Her work led to 3 federal indictments and the liberation of nearly 100 workers held in debt bondage. The second recipient exposed a corrupt municipal government taking kickbacks from developers while ignoring building safety codes. Her reporting saved lives when unsafe housing was condemned before collapse. The third, fourth, fifth recipients, each investigating corruption, each speaking for victims who had no voice, each following the example Michael Crocetti had set when he chose truth over safety. Over the next decade, the foundation quietly supported hundreds of reporters. Their work exposed networks Vincent had been connected to. Trafficking operations in 6 cities were shut down. Corrupt officials were prosecuted. Legislative reforms improved protections for vulnerable populations. The foundation's existence was deliberately low profile. No building with a name on it. No publicity campaigns. Just steady, consistent support for reporters doing dangerous, important work. Very few people knew who'd actually funded it. Fewer still knew the money had come from Vincent Torino's seized assets. Justice served through ironic redistribution. The money that had exploited innocence now protecting it. Las Vegas changed too. Not overnight. Not completely. But the incident, the story that spread through every casino, every showroom, every back office conversation, changed calculations. Mobsters who treated black entertainers with casual cruelty suddenly thought twice. Because if Dean Martin was willing to destroy a made man to defend Sammy Davis Jr., what else might he be willing to do? What other performers might follow his lead? Discrimination didn't disappear. Old habits and older hatreds don't evaporate because one man took a stand. But the cruelest expressions of it became riskier, more likely to generate consequences. It was a small change, incremental, the kind that doesn't make headlines but shifts reality for individual human beings trying to maintain dignity in an industry that often denied them any. And sometimes small changes accumulate into something larger, a foundation that shifts, a culture that bends, a city that becomes slightly more humane because someone refused to tolerate inhumanity. Michael Crocetti's name was attached to the Journalism Foundation. His photograph hung in its small office. Young reporters learning their craft would pause in front of it, reading the brief biography underneath, understanding that their scholarships came from someone who paid the ultimate price for truth. Legacy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a name on a scholarship, a reporter funded to investigate injustice, a network dismantled, a girl who had been trafficked instead graduating college. Sometimes justice is patient, quiet, working through channels that don't make headlines but change lives. The quiet victory. Years after Vincent's imprisonment, after the trials and appeals and final judgments, after the foundation had supported its 100th young reporter, Dean Martin sat at a small kitchen table with his mother. Not in Las Vegas, not in Hollywood. In Ohio, where she still lived, where she'd raised him and his siblings, where everything had begun. The house smelled of fried chicken and fresh-baked bread. His mother's hands, whether from decades of work, moved with practiced efficiency through meal preparation. Dean sat watching, sipping coffee from a chipped mug he'd used as a teenager. They talked about ordinary things. The garden she was planting for spring, the neighbor's new grandchild, weather patterns, old memories of his father, gone now, but still present in the way she'd laugh suddenly at some recalled moment. They never mentioned Vincent's name. She knew, of course. Mothers always know. She'd read about the trial, seen her son's name in newspapers, understood more than anyone what those 3 years of patient planning had cost him, but they didn't discuss it. Some victories don't need to be spoken about to be understood. Instead, she asked about his shows, about Frank and Sammy, about whether he was eating properly. The questions mothers ask, whether their sons are famous entertainers or factory workers, because love expresses itself in concern about daily details. Dean answered patiently. Yes, the shows were good. Frank was Frank, brilliant and difficult. Sammy sent his love. And yes, he was eating properly, though not as well as when she cooked. She smiled at that, patted his hand, the hand that had held microphones and bourbon glasses and photographs of a dead nephew, the hand that had dealt cards at a poker table where an empire collapsed. You're a good boy, she said simply. Not you did the right thing, or justice was served, or your nephew will be proud. Just a simple affirmation a mother gives her child, regardless of age or achievement or the complexity of choices made. Dean's eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it. I love you, Ma. I know, she replied. Now eat. The chicken's getting cold. They ate together in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who understand each other completely, without needing words. Outside, Ohio afternoon sunlight slanted through kitchen windows. Ordinary light, unremarkable, but inside that kitchen, in that moment, there was something precious. Something that all the money Vincent had accumulated, all the power he'd wielded, all the fear he'd inspired, could never buy or steal or corrupt. Dignity, love, peace earned through right action. Victory doesn't always announce itself with trumpets and applause. Sometimes it's quiet, private, a son and mother sharing a meal, understanding without speaking that some debts have been paid, some promises kept, some wrongs corrected. In the underworld, there are men who rule through fear, who believe power comes from violence and submission, who think wealth and connections place them above law and conscience. Vincent Torino chose that path, built his empire on it, and when he fell completely, leaving nothing behind but warnings in case files and regrets in prison cells. Dean Martin chose something different. Patience, evidence, truth spoken in courtrooms rather than violence in back alleys. Justice that might take years, but once achieved, could never be undone. And in the end, when all debts were settled and all accounts closed, Dean Martin sat in a kitchen in Ohio eating his mother's cooking, while Vincent Torino died forgotten in a prison medical wing. Some victories are loud. Others are permanent. The quiet ones, the ones that unfold slowly over years, the ones that change systems rather than just punishing individuals. Those are the victories that endure. That's what Dean Martin understood when he smiled at Vincent's insult, when he spent 3 years building evidence instead of 3 seconds throwing a punch, when he chose law over vengeance, patience over rage, justice over satisfaction. He understood that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy, it's protecting those who cannot protect themselves, speaking for those who have no voice, standing up when standing up costs everything. August 12th, 1962 wasn't just a night Dean Martin shut down a heckler. It was part of something larger, a longer game, a patient promise kept. And in kitchens in Ohio, in offices where young reporters plan investigations, in lives saved from trafficking networks, in a city that became slightly more humane, that victory continues. Quiet, permanent, earned.